Hi everyone, happy Wednesday. I'm Dr. Trina Hinkley from the Expanded Self. Hope you're having a great week. It's hump day today, which is always a nice day of the week to get to. Just wanted to follow up on the video from Monday about fear, about some of the things that we're afraid of. So the list is pretty long. And I guess I should probably say when I'm talking about fear, I'm not talking about phobias, which are which I put in a different bucket. I'm talking primarily about fear and the sorts of fear that we would experience on a day-to-day basis. So when I started thinking about all of the, fear of this, fear of that, fear of something else, the list just got longer and longer and longer and longer. So what I've done is I've grouped them into a number of themes, and these seem to be consistent across a lot of the literature as well, although it does depend on which part of the literature you look at. But the idea that we can group specific fears into themes about similar sorts of things is fairly consistent. So the first one I wanted to talk about was fears related to situations where we interact with other people. So this could be in any social situation. It could be in intimate relationship or relationship with friends or workplaces, anything at all really where you're interacting with other people. And the sorts of fears that would be included here are things like rejection, criticism, judgment and conflicts. So this would be a reason why people often aren't confrontational, say yes when they really want to say no, don't speak up about their own needs when they're in relationship, when they might at some other point. So these sorts of fears can really impact our behaviours and can really act to keep us small because we're afraid to speak out because we're afraid of the criticism, the judgment or the rejection. These fears can be really, really powerful, as can any fear. A lot of people experience fear related to the second group of fears, and they're fears of illness, physical threat and death. Now, pretty reasonable fears to have um, because they're physically threatening. They threaten our ability to look after ourselves, to survive in some instance. And just think for a minute about, everybody who's a parent or everybody who's looked after a child, about how many times we tell children to be careful, how many times we tell them not to fall out of the tree, how many times we won't let them climb the tree because our fear is that they'll fall out and hurt themselves. So those sorts of fears fall into this group. So they include injuries, like the ones I've just talked about, illness, blood and surgical procedures would fall into this group, and a fear of needles as well would fall into this group, and that's a pretty common fear too. Although I read a statistic of something like almost all children are afraid of needles, and then somewhere up to about 50% of adolescents are afraid of needles, and then it drops to around 20 to 30% of adults are afraid of needles. So it's a fairly general fear when we're young, but decreases over time for most people. The third group of fears is fear of animals. So this includes domestic animals as well as birds. And this fear of animals links with the predatory fear. So when we were living in the wilds, in caves, on the savannah, there were animals that could cause a lot of damage to us, to our families. So this fear is very reasonable. People are still afraid of dogs, and I know I've been afraid of dogs in the past. I have been told stories about having been in my pram when I was very young and having a dog rush up to me and bark right in my face. So that may have started my fear of dogs, but it is easing over time, which is really nice. Some people are also afraid of birds, as I mentioned, and these sorts of fears can stem from unpleasant or unsafe experiences like mine did, or from a belief that animals are a threat. So some people believe that birds carry a lot of disease and therefore they're particularly cautious about them and afraid of them. The fourth group of fears is about being in an unsafe place. So think about somewhere like crowds, a small elevator. So most people are a little bit trepidatious about being in an elevator. Um, perhaps an underground railway station, a rickety old bridge. I used to close my eyes and hold my breath when my parents or any adult drove across a rickety old bridge when I was young, because I was terrified that it was going to collapse underneath us and we'd end up in whatever river or ravine it was covering. This can also include children who are upset or afraid when they have to leave their parents and go to school because they know the home environment is a safe place and their parents are a safe place and the school is foreign and unknown for them. So this group of fears also includes unknown fear of the unknown, unknown places. It could include starting a new job, something like that. And then the last one is what I've called systemic fears. So they're fears of, that could be just about anything. So the fear of missing out, which is fairly common now. We hear a lot of conversation about it. Fear of failure, fear of success, fear of the future, fear of being alone. All of these types of fears that are broader fears within our society. So I hope that gives you a little bit of insight. That sometimes I find it just really helps to think about how these things fit together in our lives. You know, that different types of fears might go together, and perhaps if you're afraid of needles, you might also be really afraid of injuries or blood. Perhaps if you're afraid of criticism, you might also be really apprehensive about judgment, social rejection and conflicts. So we tend to see that these sorts of things would cluster together within an individual. So it's often helpful to have this broader picture of how these things fit together from a theme. So I'll pop back on Friday with a little meditation around helping to manage your fear. I hope you have a great couple of days before then. Check out my blog on my website, which went up on Monday. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments via Messenger or through the website. And I'd love to connect with you. Have a great couple of days. Bye, everyone.